Sirui now has a 5-lens set of fantastic autofocus lenses for APS-C sensors. I've reviewed each one of those lenses on my channel, and I think that they are amazing lenses for a variety of scenes. And well, a couple of weeks ago, Sirui announced a brand new lens that seems to be just as good, if not better, when it comes to quality and price. But this time, it covers full-frame sensors. Let me explain. What's up, nerds? Welcome back to the channel. So today we're talking about the brand new Sirui Aurora 85mm F1.4 full-frame portrait lens. Sirui was nice enough to send this out to me about a month ago to test out and review on my channel, but this video is not sponsored by them, no money changed hands, and they don't get to review this video before it goes out. Now, I have the Sony E-mount version of this lens, and all my testing was done on my Sony a7 IV. Over the last few weeks, I've tried my best to include this lens on a fair amount of shoots, including a portrait shoot, a video project at a local studio, and a recent event that I went to that gave me a good chance to test this lens in some low light scenarios for both photo and video. So don't worry, I've got plenty of test footage to show off, as well as some specific quality tests for those worried about pixel peeping. But with that being said, let's get into it. So this lens comes in a soft padded case that for me stayed in the box. This lens also has an included lens hood. It's a 67mm filter thread, and on the lens is an AF/MF switch, a custom button, a D-click switch for the aperture ring, which this lens does have a manual aperture ring ranging from f1.4 to f16, plus an A mode for electronic aperture control. There's also a USB-C port for updating the lens on the actual lens mount. Now this lens sports a 14 element and 9 group glass design, as well as a 15 bladed aperture. It weighs in about 540 grams and has a minimum focus of 2 feet 9.5 inches. Now this lens is available not only for Sony E-mount, but also for Nikon Z-mount and Fuji X-mount. Surprisingly enough, this lens is a mostly metal design, but doesn't feel too heavy, especially for an 85mm lens. It's nowhere near the OG G Master 85. The lens hood and caps are made of plastic, but the lens hood does have a rubber ring for some extra grip. Now, something that a lot of third-party lenses tend to forget is some kind of weather sealing, but this lens does have a rubber gasket on the mount, making me assume that this lens is at least somewhat weather sealed. Now, there is no optical image stabilization, but on my Sony a7 IV, I had very little issues with stabilization and was able to shoot at decently low shutter speeds without losing quality. When I was testing out the flaring on this lens, in my opinion, I think the flares are really well managed. The flaring is prominent, but it's not too distracting and just looks super clean. I will say though that with any hard light sources, there does seem to be some pretty strong blooming that happens around the light source. I had to double check that I didn't have any filters on, but that is just the lens itself. Now, it doesn't bother me too much since I happen to like that look, but depending on the scene you're shooting, that could be a big issue. Shooting with this lens, I was really expecting a soft image from f1.4 to like f2, but I'm surprised to report that this lens maintains a very good sharpness even at 1.4. And obviously it just gets better from there, with the sweet spot in my opinion being somewhere between f2.8 and f4, especially for portraits. I also noticed that chromatic aberration is very minimal for a third-party lens. I'm talking as good as the Sigma Art, if not better. Now, I was really hopeful with this lens that Sirui would maintain the same look that I've enjoyed with the Sniper and Nightwalker lenses, and as far as I can tell, they definitely did. I love the look that comes from this lens. The fall off from in focus to out of focus is very smooth and just nice to see. Just a really good looking image, even keeping the bokeh nice and clean in the background, which being an f1.4, I wouldn't want anything less. All right, now the main highlight of this lens, autofocus. First of all, this lens uses a stepping autofocus system rather than a linear autofocus system. In simple terms, the difference is basically one is electronic and one is mechanical, sort of. Now, using this lens for a few weeks, I honestly think that the autofocus is amazing for a third-party budget lens. In my testing both photo and video, the autofocus tracked my face and eye, even at f1.4, really well. I didn't notice the focus jumping or hunting, and even when I would jump in and out of the frame, the lens was fast and caught my face almost every time. But I did have a couple of scenarios where the focus was weird. Now, I do have a pre-production sample model of this lens, so it is very possible that these issues are because of that, but there were a few situations in video where this lens just wouldn't focus on a subject. And when I tried switching to manual focus, the lens still wouldn't change focus, forcing me to turn my camera on and off, eventually fixing the issue. This happened to me a couple of times at the event that I went to, especially when there was a lot of faces in the scene, and it also could have been due to it being a low light situation, but that is one of the drawbacks of using a stepping motor versus a linear autofocus system. I also had a situation where the minimum focus just lied to me. I'm not really sure how else to put it, but when I was testing the autofocus of the lens, the first time I mounted it to my camera, it wouldn't focus any closer than like 6 or 7 feet. But then I turned the lens to manual focus and then back to autofocus, and it fixed itself to just be the actual minimum focus, which is why I kind of say it's weird, because I've never had that experience with like any lens. That only happened once when I was first testing the lens, but it was really random. Now, switching to manual focus with a stepping motor does not give you consistency and is based on the speed at which you turn the focus ring, where a linear focus motor in manual focus will give you full control and consistent pulls typically. I also want to mention that the eye autofocus is consistent until you put any type of diffusion filter in front of it. During one of my shoots, I had a Prism Lens Effects Dream filter on the lens, and it would still do face detection focus, but it wouldn't catch the eye. I should also mention that any of the shots with the guitar in the studio were with some heavy diffusion filters in front of the lens because I was testing some filters for that video. So if you happen to see some serious blooming and softness in those images, it's the filter and not the lens, I promise. It still turned out to be some awesome images though. The autofocus does make a little bit of noise and isn't as quiet as a G Master or the Sigma Art lens, but the only time I really noticed it was when I was in my studio testing the lens and I was like 2 or 3 feet away from it. There is a little bit of focus breathing, enough that I notice it, but for the purpose of this 85mm lens, I don't think it's much of a concern. I think overall, I'm really impressed with the autofocus of this lens in like 95% of the situations I was in. For a third-party lens and compared to others that I've used in the past, this lens is very much on par, if not better than I expected. I really do think those weird situations are just because I have a pre-production sample, but I am in contact with Sirui to address those issues. All right. Now you're all probably wondering at this point, how much does this lens cost? Well, it retails for $599 US, but is currently on sale, I believe, to the end of the year for $499. So for $500, in my opinion, you're getting an amazing autofocus full frame portrait lens that not only does great in photo, but holds up pretty gosh dang well in video too. The build quality matches that of other third-party 85mm lenses, and the image quality, in my opinion, is superb. The one thing I would keep in mind with this lens is reliability.
This lens absolutely has its drawbacks, has its perks. It's fast autofocus when it's working, when it's reliable, but when it's not reliable, then what are you supposed to do? That's where I struggle the most with like affordable lenses like this, is that they're not 100% of the time reliable. Sometimes the contacts can get dirty. Sometimes there's a firmware issue or something like that that can ruin your entire setup. That's what makes me nervous in a lot of scenarios.
When you spend less money on a lens, you tend to trade off a few things. Like I said, this is a sample model of this lens, and the issue I had could be due to that, but I'm of the belief that you pay for reliability and consistency. For me, most of the shoots I'm on don't tend to be like a one chance to get the shot type of situation. I typically have multiple opportunities to perfect the scene, and if I have issues with autofocus or manual focus, then I can take the time to make sure it's working and go back to shooting. But if you're a wedding photographer or videographer, or you're covering an event or an interview, then this lens could be more of a liability rather than an asset. So if you need reliable consistency every single time, no matter what, then I think you'd be better off investing in a lens like the Sony G Master or the Sigma Art. But it ultimately depends on your budget and what you're shooting. Now, I can't end this video without talking about alternative options to this lens. There is not a short supply of 85mm f1.4 lenses, and a lot of them are very good lenses. The one I've used the most is the Sigma Art 85mm f1.4. I don't own it, but that's an amazing lens. It's sharp, has great autofocus and image quality that we all know from the Sigma Art line. But that lens is a lot heavier than this lens, and it cost over $1,000 US. I think direct competitors to this lens would be like the Samyang or the Rokinon 85-1.4 or the new-ish Mikey 85-1.4. And I think another lens to not forget about is the Sony 85 f1.8. Even though it's an f1.8, that lens is still so good. I've owned that lens a couple of times over the years, and it is a great affordable Sony lens at $550. So even though I've really enjoyed this Sirui lens and I will 100% be adding it to my lineup of lenses, there are still great options out there to choose from depending on your budget and your needs. But what do you guys think? Do I need to do a comparison between this lens and some other options out there? Or do you think this is the end all be all of 85mm f1.4 budget full frame lenses? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you're interested in purchasing this lens, there are links in the description. They are affiliate links, so if you do purchase from those links, it does support the channel. Thank you so much if you do. And if you enjoyed this video, maybe watch this video next, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell button so you never miss out on new young filmmaker content. Good luck filmmaking.